Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
This is a big picture episode, and by that I mean it has to do with future planning. Specifically, what direction you're going to take your practice in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and beyond. Now, I think it would be an understatement to say that, a lot has gone on since January of 2020. Besides everything directly related to the pandemic itself, we're also living with the after effects or ramifications of its fallout in areas we may never have even expected, from inflation and a distorted labor market to higher interest rates and the off-again, on-again threat of recession that nobody can seem to make up their mind about. And what's the net result of all of this for, the average dentist? Well, among other things, you're seeing higher costs in just about every area of the practice, lower reimbursement if you're participating in plans, and hiring issues like never before. Well, the average MGE client is a private practicing dentist, and as you might expect, our clients look to us to understand what's happening with the bigger picture and how it may affect the dental industry to help them, chart a path to success. And it's with that in mind I've put together this episode. In this episode, I want to go over 4 action items or areas of focus that we've been discussing with our clients for the last 6 months to a year, in light of everything that's gone on, to ensure A, that their practice is successful, and B, that it stays successful in the years to come. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. So let's start off by just discussing what do we mean by success, practice success. Does it mean that you're working 90 hours a week out of 5 operatories on your own, on roller skates, yet you net $300,000 or $400,000 a year, so you're in the top 1% income earners and you're stressed out of your mind? No, we would not define that as success. Let's look at a couple of the basic components of success. Number one, you're in private practice. You get to call the shots. You have manageable hours. Your hours are what you want. You have a degree of control over them. You get paid what you're worth. You're not getting paid $500 for a crown. And you have a high level of career satisfaction doing the treatment that patients need and that you love to do. And there's little to no stress coming from the business. You're having fun, doing what you love to do and getting paid for it. That's how we define success. So when we're saying, how do you get and stay successful? That's the direction we're heading. It's not just how can you jack up the numbers in your practice. I mean, that's fine, but really doesn't matter how much you make. It's a matter of how much you get to keep, right? And what it costs you personally, what's that work-life balance like? So we're looking at a good work-life balance and you're successful financially. So what are these 4 areas we're talking about? Obviously there's a lot of areas you can focus on. There's profitability and case acceptance, etc. But these are sort of 4 big things based on what's been going on. So why don't I just jump right into them? So point number 1, area of focus number 1, if you want to have a successful office long-term, you have to be able to control your fees now more than ever. Now, what does that mean? Well, A, it means that you're keeping your fees current or, in step with what's going on economically, right? So look, and I'm not going to do a whole, I have tons of numbers and charts and I love them. I don't nerd out on them too bad, but they're great. They're somewhat informative, but I'm not going to, whip them all out here and bore everybody to death. But let's look at the basics here. We do know that there has been inflation, you have this last month was the good news where we only had a 6.4% increase year over year in the consumer price index, right? That's the value of a basket of goods from this year to last year went up by only 6.4%. Whereas it was at 9% during points last year. And it was over 5% in September of 2021 when I made my first podcast on it. So this is something that is now more and more of a fact of life, whereas before it was relatively, negligible for the 10 plus years prior. So we've seen prices go up. You're seeing prices go up in the practice. You're seeing it's costing you more for labs, for marketing, for staff, etc. So you have to make sure your fees are moving in step with that. Now, what's become interesting about this is raising your fees used to be something that, we'd advise clients to do it every year, right? Every year, it was either me or Dr. Wintereg, Greg, at least at some point during the year, we'd make a video or we'd talk to the clients in the summer. Hey, folks, time to raise your fees, based on inflation, 2 to 3%. And some people would do it and some people wouldn't. And it wasn't that big of a deal. Well, that was fine from 2002 to last year or the year before. It really was not a big deal. But now you have, quite a different situation that you're looking at now. If you look at some of the way, like food prices are up That 6.4% that was reported this last month, that's an average, right, of different types of goods like food, labor, rent, etc. Food prices are up by over 10%. And this is what your employees are paying. And this is what you have to pay. So your fees have to march up at the same rate as inflation is marching up. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you're going to price yourself out of the market, right? You're going to price yourself to where you can't afford the things you need for your business to survive. So number one, you have to raise your fees regularly. The problem, as I was saying, is we used to tell people raise their fees, order something like the Wasserman Guide. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage, and you can kind of see where you stand fee-wise, based on your zip code for different CDT codes. And the problem with the Wasserman Guide now is it's a great guide. I haven't found one that's better, and I'm not in any way affiliated with the Wasserman Guide. I just like it because I've been using it for a long time. Maybe I've just gotten used to it. But I think it's a very complete guide. The problem with this, I don't know that it has fully accounted for inflation. I don't think we're going to see those numbers update till next year. And maybe I'll get the new one and see if it's updated. But, and I'm seeing this in a couple different types of websites, there's another website called salary.com where you can plug in your zip code and you plug in a position that you're looking to hire, dental assistant. And here's my zip code, and it'll tell you the low, median, and high salary for that position in your area. One thing I found with salary.com lately, is it's not keeping up with the actual rise in real wages. For example, in the San Fernando Valley in California, it had, I think, last time I checked at least, I don't have it in front of me, it had the high level of hygienist salary at about $49 an hour, or $48 an hour. Whereas if you look at what people are actually asking for out there and what's being advertised, they're paying $60 to $65 an hour for hygienists out there with a $4,000 signing bonus in some cases for corporate offices. So in that case, reality isn't matching the site. So with the Wasserman Guide, if you're going to use something like that to figure out what your fees should be, what's going to happen is you pull it up and you look at your zip code, you look at the code, and it'll tell you, what the percentile your fee falls into. So if you're in the 30th percentile, let's say, with a specific fee, what that means is that 70% of the offices in your area charge more than that, and 30% charge that amount or less. Okay, if you're in the 50th percentile, it means half charge more, half charge the same or less, right? So you got to figure out what percentile you want to fall in. And again, I could tell you, but you got to do what's real to you. I'd be at least in the 60th. I know some people who like to be in the 70th percentile. So you have to raise your fees commensurate with what's going on. But here's the problem. So let's say you got something like the Wasserman Guide, which is, again, I think it's really good. But you got the Wasserman Guide and you adjust your fees at the beginning of 2022 and you go, okay, good. So I've changed my fee to, let's say for a crown, it's $1,200, right? So it's $1,200. Well, over the course of the year, prices went up overall by 8 to 9%. So you've got to be adjusting that fee a little bit more often when inflation is this hot. Like at this point, I'd be looking quarterly or at the lowest amount, semi-annually, like every 6 months, and making minor fee adjustments. Now, why? A, it allows you to keep up with what's going on. It's kind of a no-brainer, right? And also, if you're doing those fee adjustments incrementally, once a month might get nuts, right? But I think once a quarter is fine. If you're doing it incrementally, if a procedure goes up by $5 or $8, that's not super noticeable. Whereas if you wait 1 to 2 years and then you go, oh my gosh, I'm in the 30th percentile. I'm not, because they stop in those fee guides. They don't, below 30, they don't put any numbers. Like there is nothing below 30, right? If you're below 30, that means your fees are way too low. So you look, you go, wow, I'm below 30. I'm in trouble. So I got to jack my fees real hard right now. That's a lot more of a shock to the system if I came to your office and a pro fee was, $110 last time I came in, and this time it's $185. I'm going to notice that versus if it went from $150 to $155. So, and that I can expect. People can expect prices to inflate. I think if you ever had to raise your fees, you're never going to find a better time in history, at least in rememberable history if you're from a career perspective. Because the last time inflation was this quick was back in the 80s or the early 80s, late 70s. You're never going to find a better time in history where you're going to have broad agreement on raising prices because people know prices are going up. So A, you have to be able to raise your fees. But then this brings us back to B, my favorite thing to talk about. But maybe if I say it enough, maybe I'm talking about this a lot because I figure if I say enough, people will really get it, right? Is there are certain cases where you cannot raise or affect your fees. And that would be with PPO, HMO, or any other type of discount plan participation. Now, look, I know you may have 60 to 70% of your practice is, your participating provider, and 60 to 70% of your practice is involved with PPOs. And the thought of dumping those PPOs may be horrifying. And I'm not going to get into a humongous thing on this. I have talked about it in other episodes. But if you take a look at why would you join a PPO? You join a PPO because you need people to come into the practice, right? So essentially, it's just the same reason you do marketing. I do marketing because I want to get new patients into the practice. Same reason you join a PPO. The difference is with marketing, to get that new patient, let's say I do a postcard or a pay-per-click or some Facebook ads or Instagram ads, whatever, right? If I'm paying for a new patient, I'm paying once. I pay the $200 it cost me to get that new patient one time. Every time after that, I'm not paying anything. With a PPO, I'm paying every single time I see this patient. With the 40 or 50% write-off on preventative services, or, the $850 crown I'm doing instead of the $1,400 crown that I normally charge for. We call that an acquisition fee, right? You're paying that acquisition fee every single time you're seeing this patient. So the solution, if you have this huge amount of PPO inundation, and this has been the solution professionally for the last 10 years, is just see more patients. See more and more patients. Crank up the volume, right? And, okay, I guess that can work, and I guess somebody can make a living at it, but after a while, it gets to be a bit old. And in some cases, the PPO fees, while this has been going on, have been getting so much lower and lower and lower. Look at Delta. How many Delta Premier providers are there? There aren't any more new ones, right? You start off with a good fee, you bring people in, and then you just lower the fee over time because you got to accept it. Yeah, sure, you can negotiate them, but still, that even a negotiated fee is not going to be anything close to the acquisition cost you'd pay once to get a marketed, private, regular fee-for-service new patient. So, what ends up happening is you have a bunch of people with a lot of PPOs in the practice, and they almost there's a bit of an apathy about it. Well, you sure it would be great to be out of PPOs, but it's never going to happen. That's absolutely not true. I've seen plenty of clients get out, and how you get out and the mechanism, big picture on how you get out really depends on how involved you are and how many plans we're talking about. If you've got an office with 80% participation, in the patient base, that's going to take a little bit. So, and it depends on the contract you're in, and it depends on the number of patients in that plan. But it's something that until you start, you're never on the way out, right? You've never confronted it. Otherwise, it just becomes this, oh, gee, one day, wouldn't it be cool if I could get out of PPOs? And the problem, I've talked about also quite a bit is what ended up happening as a result of the last couple of years. I know especially a couple different companies lowered reimbursement while this inflation's been raging. So, your costs are going up. So the insurance companies lowered the amount they were paying you. And in some cases, sold it to employers as a big win. They saved money for their employees. They get to pay you less because they lowered your fees if you participate. So, they're starving you out here. So you've got to, I guess from a business perspective, if you want to look at one overarching, secret to business success, it's not even a secret to business success. It's sort of something that most business people take for granted, which is you have to be able to, if you run a business, you have to be able to set your own fees. If I have a furniture store, I have to be able to set my own prices. If I have a grocery store, I have to set my own prices. Any business, name a business, 7-Eleven sets their own prices, the restaurant sets their own prices. Sure, you can price yourself out of a market. If somebody gets a bowl of, or a hamburger at my restaurant for $12 and they're $5, everywhere else in town, I might have less people buying hamburgers. Maybe it'd have to be a really good hamburger. But you get the idea. I have to have control over my own fee schedule and prices. When you have a lot of PPO participation, you don't, and especially in an environment where inflation is moving a lot faster than it is supposed to, really, that puts you at risk. So anything that controls your ability to set your own fees or prices or fee schedule, you need to eliminate, and you need to eliminate quickly and intelligently. Like I said, if there's a lot of participation, you may gradually have to work your way out, etc., right? As well as get your new patients, learn how to sell under control so that you don't end up insurance driven. Because again, you can get into that apathetic mode. Well, there's only, there's no way I can get out of PPOs. So then when that PPO patient comes in and only wants to do what insurance covers, well, that's just what we're doing, right? Well, there's a way out of this. I promise you there is. And here's what I'd invite you to do. If you're looking at this and you really want to get into PPOs, but you really just don't know where to start, we do offer something called a PPO exit strategy session, where you'll actually talk to one of our practice management specialists who can assess your current situation and gives you some tips to start moving out and in the right direction. So that's point number one. Being able to control your fees now is more important than ever. Point number two, or area of focus number two, is you need to make building your hygiene department a priority. Now, I come from the business world. I've been working in the dental industry for a while, but my prior experience was just in business, right? And I've also been involved with other businesses. I can tell you, and I've said this before, any business would kill to have what you have with regards to hygiene. Any business, car mechanic, a restaurant, anybody. In other words, if they had a built-in mechanism where someone had to come into their office, or at least was compelled or thought it was the right thing to do. Nobody's forced to, obviously, but the average person out there, if you were to ask him how many times he's supposed to visit the dentist a year for a checkup, they'll tell you twice a year. Of course, in some cases it's more, but you get the idea. But if every business had that, where people felt compelled or required, or that they were supposed to go to it twice a year, they would kill for that. You have that built into your business model, okay? And it is not used. I've said before that the two areas in dentistry that are usually that underperform the most are hygiene and case acceptance. These are the areas where dentists tend to perform at the worst, right? Or dental offices. And if you look at it from just a purpose perspective for a second, your hygiene department is how you keep patients healthy. So, you do some restorative work on me and you send me off. I don't really have a reason to come back and see you for dental work, but if I'm coming in every 6 months to get checked up or looked at, you're looking at me to ensure not only am I healthy, but I'm staying healthy. And if there's anything else, a kind of an early development of a potential problem, you can fix it before it becomes a bigger problem. So your hygiene department really fits in with the overall purpose of your practice, which is to keep patients healthy. It's also a profit center. It keeps people coming. It's how you actually retain patients. Patient retention is a big deal. How do I keep my patients? Where do you think they go? They go to hygiene. But for some reason, it is horribly ignored. I talked a lot about this in episodes 45 and 46. But, the compliance rate in most hygiene departments is about 30%. Okay, 30%. If you want to find out what your compliance rate is, this means what percentage of the patient base is complying with their hygiene schedule, meaning showing up regularly. And we have a little spreadsheet you can use if you want to see where your office stands. It's called the hygiene formula. I'll put the link on the episode webpage. But to give you an example, let me give you some I'll give you some numbers, but this is not dissimilar from actual examples we see. You'll see an office with 4,000 charts. Now, an office with 4,000 charts, okay, should technically have, okay, get these numbers, 96 recall appointments a week. If that office is closed 2 weeks a year, which most offices are, they're open 50, they're closed 2 weeks, and they have 4,000 charts, that office should have 96 recalls, probably more, a week. That's if everybody's on 6-month recall. 96 a week. If the average recall appointment is $200, especially if you're dropping plans, be even higher, that's over $80,000 a month in hygiene. But 96 recall appointments a week, if you have 8 hygiene patients a day, that's 12 days of hygiene a week. If you have a 6 or 7 op office, you might have 3 full-time hygienists. You might need an associate just to keep up with just the hygiene traffic. And keep in mind, those 96 recall appointments a week, those aren't hygiene visits. That doesn't include your soft tissue management program. And that doesn't include new patients if you see new patient initials through hygiene. So, but what do we normally see with an office with 4,000 charts? You see like 3 to 4 days of hygiene. Area is not really growing. As a matter of fact, if you want to keep one key growth statistic, it should be number of recall patients a week or a month. Look how many you're seeing per month. That number is not growing. That means that your practice is not retaining patients. You're going crazy bringing people in the front door and you're sending them out the back. And like I said, if you want to see where you stand, download the hygiene formula and take a look. But this is something we are really pressing on with our clients because it's an area that is done so poorly industry-wide. But if you do it right, it is just a practice, booms the practice. Because keep in mind also, if you're seeing those 96 hygiene patients a week, what about the dentistry that has to be done? It's not just the 80,000 to 100,000 coming from hygiene. There's all the dental work these patients need, which brings up a good point. And this is not unusual. we'll have a new client and they have 2,000 to 3,000 charts and they've got a 3-day-a-week hygienist, right? And you'll talk to them about case presentations and case acceptance, and they'll go, oh, no, my case acceptance is great. All my patients have all their work done, and, I go into hygiene and, nobody needs any work. Well, okay, think about this for a second. If you have 3,000, 4,000 charts or 2,000 charts, you should be seeing 40, 50, 60 hygiene or recall patients a week. But if you're only doing 3 days a week of hygiene and that includes new patients and soft tissue management, you're probably seeing closer to 10 or 15 or 20 maybe. So what's happening is the really compliant patients, who do everything you say and show up when they're supposed to show up, are the ones who keep coming back. It's that other 60% of your patient base that needs a little bit of a nudge or a little bit of a follow-up in order to come back in that are just not getting worked at all. So it looks like everybody's quote-unquote clean and needs no work, but that's absolutely not true. You're just not calling those people. So again, heavy area of focus. If you want to see where you stand, check it with the hygiene formula. Which brings us on to point 3. Now, point number 3 is kind of interesting. And what it is you want your office to be profitable on basic bread and butter or nuts and bolts dentistry. Fillings, couple crowns, basic stuff. I'm not talking about the insurance classification, basic, major. No, I'm just talking about the basic, run-of-the-mill dentistry. Now, I say this only because, there's a lot of popularity in newer procedures, whether it's for sleep apnea or clear aligners or FMR cases or new technology or new, CE you may have done. And FMRs are awesome, right? As a matter of fact, you should be able to do them. We're actually co-sponsoring a course on it that starts in April here. That's going to be awesome. But the point being is you don't want to live off of them. And what's happened, we've had this happen with clients and we've retooled them, where we'll see a client who, they have some kind of a funnel going. They're doing FMRs and, they're doing 5, 6 cases a month, 7 cases a month. We've had clients do more, 15 cases a month, big offices. But you look at their production and that's 80% of their production. That is a danger indicator because, you're basing your entire practice off of a $30 to $40 or $50,000 case. That's dangerous. So what we've done with those clients is, what if the funnel all of a sudden dries up, then you're in trouble. So we've had a client where, there's 100,000 in regular dentistry and hygiene and 400 in FMR. We've switched it to where they'll build their basic, office revenues up doing basic dentistry and hygiene up to 300. And then the FMRs are on top of that. So I'm not saying don't do FMRs, by all means do them, but it should be that your office is profitable and surviving off of basic dentistry. So you're putting your focus there, right? While you're still doing the FMRs or whatever additional types of procedures that you like to do, whether it's sleep apnea or this or that falls on top of it. It's sort of like the icing on the cake from a revenue perspective. It's not what you're expecting to live off of. And this is important because if you get into that situation, because it's a much bigger hit, let's just look at it strictly from a business perspective. Let's take the clinical and the doctor hat off for a second. Just looking strictly from a business perspective. So if you're doing an FMR case and it's, $40,000. Okay, so the amount of time you're having to spend from beginning to end, from presenting it to end on that case versus to make the same amount of revenue doing single crowns, not even comparable. Okay, you'd have to spend a lot more doing single crowns. So, it's a quicker, bigger hit, right? Or the amount you'd have to make, the amount of work you'd have to do 40,000 in hygiene. Much more work. So the focus, because it's easier to do, assuming that the person actually needs it, of course, tends to shift towards that. So you don't want to do that. It's just like with recall, right? With recall, no one cares about the hygienist as long as the patient's in the chair. We don't care what the patient is. Could be an STM case, could be a new patient, whatever. As long as they're busy, but no one's looking, are we actually increasing the number of recall patients we're seeing? Same thing here. You want to monitor your office by the types of procedures that you do. So your regular run-of-the-mill dental procedures, okay, should make your office profitable. Anything you're doing on top of that should be icing on the cake from a revenue perspective. Now, obviously, look, patients need what they need, and I'm not trying to make any statement clinically, but I think it's a good idea to be able to do these types of cases. I think it's awesome, but I would not want to be in a position where if all of a sudden I had less of these in 1 month in particular, I was in trouble financially. That's the last thing I would want to do. I would want that to always add on to a stable, successful base that I have going. So that's point number 3, which brings us to point number 4, which is stabilizing your staffing situation. So this one is really interesting. we've been talking about ever since the lockdown stopped and people started coming back to work. Staffing has gotten just weird, right? I think last month unemployment was at 3.4%, which is the lowest in at least 20 years. I don't have graphs. I didn't bother searching for a graph that goes back further, but to give you an idea, was at 3.4% last month. The last time it was close to that low was in January of 2020, before all the lockdowns, and it was at 3.5. We now have half a person for every job that's available. In other words, there's 2 jobs available for every 1 person in the United States. The last time we were at that point was in September of last year. So the labor market is still tight. So, I've been looking at this because you get asked, when is this going to get better? Okay, well, let me just point one thing up. It has to do with demographics, okay? Because you might think, well, when's it going to get better? Well, the only way it would get better is if businesses closed or a bunch of people got fired. It's the only way it would get better, folks, right? So let's just step back for a second and take a look at demographics in the United States. I'm specifically targeting this to the United States because these statistics are very accessible. But this is from 2021. This is, and I'll put the link to it. It's from Statista. I think it's Statista or Statista. I don't know how it's pronounced. Anyway, whatever. This is a U.S. population by age. Okay, U.S. population by age. And this is in 2021. And it goes to, people under 5 years old to people, over 80, 85, etc. So what I did here is I capped this age thing at 60 to 64. Let's pick our working years. Look, obviously some people work when they're younger than 20, but let's say working years begin at 20. Obviously not if you're in graduate school or still in college, but let's say working years begin at 20. And let's say for the most part, they cap at 65. I mean, not everybody retires when they're 65 and, some people still work. I'm not making a statement on whether you should or shouldn't work. But I'm saying, where's the bulk of your workforce coming from? It's usually the ages that are used are 18 to 64. Here I'm going 20 to 64. Okay. Now, as of 2021, there were in the United States 193 million, almost 194 million people between the ages of 20 and 64. It was 193.91. Okay. All right. So easy enough, right? Now, let's look at where this is going. Because remember, I have numbers under 20 from the ages of 0 to 19. Well, let's march this forward 5 years from now. What is our labor market going to look like 5 years from now? So remember, we were at 193,000,091 or 193,910,000, blah, blah, blah. But you get the idea. What's it going to look like in 2026, 5 years from now? Well, it's 194.24. It only goes up by about, 300,000 people in the next 5 years based on the people who are under 20 aging 5 years. Those 15 to 19-year-olds move into the 20 to 24-year-old bracket. So the workforce increases by only 300,000 people by the year 2026. Well, let's move forward beyond that. Let's go to the year 2031. 10 years from now, what should happen? Because now we've got the 10 to 14-year-olds are going to move into the workforce, and the people who are 55 and over are moving out of the workforce, right? Okay, well, in 2031, what will our workforce be? 194.12. It actually goes down by 120,000. So track with this. Now it's at 193.91. 5 years from now, it's 194.24. 10 years from now, it's at 194.12. It went down. Let's go 5 years later, the year 2036. Now, you might be listening and going, let's see, that's 15 years from now. Yeah, I'll be retired by then. I don't care. Whatever. Doesn't matter. If you're working 15 years from now, this is the labor market you're looking at. In the year 2036, what is the workforce going to consist of? These are people from the ages of 20 to 64. 193.51. I'll say it again, 193.51. It's actually lower than it is today. So in the next 15 years, based on the populace that is, because you've got this really weird look as far as our population goes. Like there are more people in the boomer generation, born after or before 1964. I think it's from 47 to 64 or something like this. There are more people currently alive in that generation than there are in the generation below it, Generation X, generation I'm from. People born from 65 to 1980. So what's interesting is the that was a huge generation, the baby boomers. The millennials were not quite as big, but it's a decent sized generation. The generation in between, Generation X, was small, and Generation Z below it, born up through 2012, is smaller than that. So the workforce that's coming isn't going to alleviate this labor shortage, is my point. See, you wonder why people are trying to experiment with robots so much to serve you fast food, because we're running out of people to fill these jobs. So I'm not trying to make it, bad or hopeless or whatever, but that's what you're looking at. Just from a straight demographics perspective, the workforce is actually projected to decline over the next 15 years. Okay. Now, what could affect that? There's a lot of things that could happen in 15 years, right? I mean, heck, 15 years ago was 2008. I mean, heck, I wouldn't have predicted half the stuff that's happened in 2023. So a lot can happen. But, you could have a massive slowdown economically. You could end up with a bunch of layoffs, right? But if the trend stays relatively the same without the addition of a ton of robotics, you're going to still have this situation where you have more jobs than you have people. And of course, it'll, undulate. You'll have periods where it's better and periods where it's worse. So what can we gather from all of this? Well, staff has always been a problem by survey. I mean, even before all this stuff was going on, but now it's more. And the other thing we can gather from it is you can't wait for something to change or to happen environmentally that's all of a sudden going to solve it. So what's the sort of the broad strokes as to how you want to confront this or address this? This is what we're talking to our clients about. It's two simple things. Number one is you want to be able to attract at least a core of ambitious, competent people who really want to work hard, okay, commensurate to the size of your organization. So if I have a staff of 5, that might be one person. A staff of 10, I might have 2 or 3 of these types, like executive types. If I have a smaller office, I'm hiring an office manager. Here's my executive. Maybe I have a 10-person office. I might have my office manager and my lead assistant, and I might have somebody in charge of production, okay? The idea is if you have these executive types and you have a good organizational structure, which is a whole other thing, well, then they will take responsibility for certain areas of your practice so that if something goes wrong in their area, you don't have to dive in all of a sudden to fix everything. Like, let's say I have somebody in charge of overall production in the office. They handle scheduling and they handle, patient satisfaction, etc. And they make sure that the assistants have everything all straight and I have supplies and this and that and the other. And then I have the office manager handles the overall office as well as the administrative side of the practice. Well, if I have somebody in charge of that production area, this is a bigger office, and we lose our hygiene coordinator. Well, that's not this disaster that the office manager has to jump into all of a sudden with both feet. The person in charge will make sure that it gets sorted out. Sure, the office manager might help with the hiring and whatnot, but you have somebody there you can work with to make sure that this area gets handled. That's how we've built our company. We have a bunch of competent executives. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You have to have people who are responsible for various areas. This is why you need an organization structure. So you need a couple people. At least, I mean, it really depends on the size of your company, but you need a couple executive types as you grow to make sure that you continue to grow. Because what's going to happen, let's say, not everybody's going to be like that. You'll have somebody who is a receptionist and they really like being the receptionist and they're going to do that for a couple of years and then they're going to move on or move out of state or go do something else. And that's fine, right? They're a team member and they contribute. They're just not going to be with us for 20 years. That's what happens. You're going to have some degree of turnover. So in order to, defer or to avoid the pain associated with this, I need to be able to do two things. One, I have to do what I just mentioned. I have to have a couple good executives, core personnel that I can really rely upon to keep things going. Number one, right? And number two, I have to have quick ways to train new personnel. And one thing I should mention on, having those key people, if you want key good people that are going to stick with you for a long time, really capable people, there has to be upside in your business. There's no upside. There's no room for growth. Like I've come to you. Sure, maybe I'm starting on a junior position. I'm your scheduler, but you can see I'm capable and I want to move up and build a career out of this. Well, if we're not growing or I have no space to grow into where I can increase my responsibilities and my potential income, I'm going to eventually find somewhere I can. So you're going to have to be in a situation where you have opportunities for growth if you want to retain a couple of really good core type personnel. You also may end up with somebody who's your receptionist and just, is your receptionist for life and they just enjoy it. I'm not saying, and if you have a situation where you have a stable staff and nobody's changed for the last 10 years, more power to you. I'm not saying that this is something you have to do. You don't have to change them. It's just the way life works right now. You may lose some personnel. So I'd prefer to keep the losses of my personnel sort of at, to make a sports comparison at the bottom of the roster. not my superstar pitcher. I'm, losing somebody I just picked up last year. The newer staff, maybe not on the key positions, I might turn over a bit more than my key executives who are with me long term is the general idea. So if I'm going to turn over staff, lower within the organization with less responsibilities, like I said, I'm going to need key people to make sure that this doesn't end up all over my plate, that actually just handle their areas. And those people need to be trained as executives, and I have to have a good organizational structure. But I also have to have a quick way to train these new people. Okay, these people who aren't going to be with me forever, because I need to be able to train them fast. This is why we have our online platform, DDS Success. We have positional training on that platform. You can train people for various positions. Now, obviously, things may be done different in your office, in which case you would, make adjustments to specific things to your practice. But the idea is you want to be able to onboard and bring somebody up to speed really quick. I'll put the link to that on the episode webpage as well if you want to check it out and get a free demo. So look, those are the 4 main points of focus we've been going over with our clients very heavily. Of course, there's other things we handle with each individual client, whether it's case acceptance, marketing, overhead management, etc. for growth. But long term, these are the 4 big points to be looking at. There's also other growth opportunities and things like this I've talked about in other episodes. But as far as keeping your practice in a condition where it's successful, stays successful, and is robust enough to weather any type of economic slowdown, as well as be super successful in a great economy, these are the 4 points you want to focus on. I hope this helps. And if you need any further help or you want to talk to somebody, you can always get a free practice consultation here with us at MGE. You can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Also, if you have any specific questions about anything I covered in this episode, you can email me directly at jeffb@mgeonline.com. Folks, have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.